Ableton Live is a DAW designed for live situations, and its intuitive MIDI mapping environment makes it a great sound engine to use with Glover. From Live's perspective, Glover is just like any other MIDI controller once you've set it up correctly. So the following is definitely not a comprehensive tutorial on all the possibilities within Live, but I just want to show you what our mapping process is like from Glover to Live and how Live perceives Glover. I am going to make some simple mappings, a simple project. When I'm done, I'll be able to play chords, bass and drums and control effects all with one hand with one Leap Motion controller that I have here. Let's start with the most essential step. For Live to receive any MIDI from Glover at all, we have to make sure that it's set up as a MIDI input. And you can do that by going to Live and go to Preferences and then navigate to the MIDI panel, which I'm already in currently. And then here we see a list of all of your MIDI ports. So these are the inputs, so that's MIDI coming into Live, and these are the outputs going out of Live. And for Glover to be able to control Live, we have to make sure that these inputs are on. So two of them are you want to toggle on. So first we have track, and track allows you to control the input of a whole MIDI track with an instrument on it like a synthesizer that you would otherwise maybe use a MIDI keyboard for. And then you will see it show up in this MIDI from part of the track. So if you want to send individual notes or use Glover instruments like the note matrix or chord machine, you need to have this on for Live to receive those notes from Glover. You also have to make sure that remote is on. So remote allows you to use Glover to MIDI map to any parameter within Live. So this can be anything from controlling volume faders to starting clips, but also things like the resonance of a sound within a software synthesizer or the decay of a reverb plugin. All right, so once you've done this, you're basically good to go. If you're not so familiar with the mapping process in Glover yet, you might maybe want to watch our longer tutorial on mappings first. But who knows, maybe just by following the steps that I'm going to take now, that will clear up some things too. All right. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to drag in a software synthesizer onto a MIDI track within Live. I already chose one. I've put it here. So this is just comes with Live. It's I think it has a analog. Yeah, so it's an analog synth. It has some macros here. Now what I need to do, what I want to do is to play chords on this synth. So I'm going to go to Glover. And I need to add my device first. I'm going to click plus, and I've got a Leap Motion. So you can see it's tracking, and let's quickly train a couple of postures. So I'm going to train a fist, open hand, and one finger point. That will do for this tutorial. Yeah. All right. And then to play some chords, I'm going to use a chord machine, which you can find at the top here. And I am going to play. So soon as I start using the keys on this keyboard, you'll hear them coming from Live already. That's a nice one. And I'm gonna go use a posture I'm going to use a fist to trigger this chord. Whoopee. All right, and then a second chord. Let's go with some minor vibes. And I'm going to use a 1-finger point. If you haven't used the chord machine before, we also have a tutorial dedicated to this. So you can look up how this exactly works. So now when I make a fist, D sus2, one-finger point, A minor. So that was all we had to do. So let's do a little bit of administration while we're at it and name this chord machine chords. And maybe give it a nice color. Synths are often blue in my arrangements. So now we might want to control this filter cutoff within this synth. So what I often like to do is to kind of audition the sound or come up with a musical idea first that I kind of like play within live sort of manually, and then after that imagine how I want to play that with my movement. So I already have these chords, and then now I'm just gonna use my mouse to see what happens if I would be using this, be controlling this parameter. So I want to control this filter cutoff, and I want to do that. How do I want to do that? I want to do that with a roll. So I'm going to make a mapping input and then choose roll from orientation inputs. And you can see that my roll movement's coming in. And you can see like this is kind of how far I physically can roll my hand. So let's make that the maximum of the input. And then I'm all the way here at the minimum. So I get the full range. And then I need a mapping output. Let's connect them already. Oh, so sometimes this can be a little bit fiddly, connecting these lines. So what you can also do is click your mapping input, and then on your keyboard, just type in the number that you can see here on the right of your mapping output, and then it will connect it for you. So I'm just going to press 1 on my keyboard now, and then boom, we're mapped. Okay, so I'm gonna drag in a MIDI output onto this mapping output. And for now, let's just go with the suggested MIDI CC number. So Glover automatically starts within every new scene at 20. And then each mapping you create from there, it just automatically creates the next number. But usually I would kind of group my types of mappings together in groups of CC messages in kind of an order. But for now, this is totally fine. Okay, let's not forget about the admin so we don't make a mess of this project. And so this is going to be filter cut off. Okay, so now to map this roll, I go back to live, click on the parameter that I want to map, then go into MIDI mapping mode. So you can click MIDI up here, or you can use Command M on your keyboard. So now when I start making a roll with above the leap, it should send that message 120 to live, and the parameter that I have selected will then be mapped. There we go. Okay. So now I have the filter cutoff mapped. So if I get out of MIDI mapping mode and I make that roll movement, you can see that I'm controlling it. So when I now do a chord, and then So I want to control the space as well, which I think is this macro is connected to the wetness of the reverb. And what do I want to control that? I think I'm gonna go for height. So now that you can see that the higher I put my hand, the more you can see the signal graph move along with it. And I'm gonna make a MIDI mapping. Let's drag in MIDI. Again, we're fine with this suggested CC number. Connect the mappings, and this is going to be space. So now we go back to live, go into MIDI mapping mode, click space, and then it's mapped. So by chance, this all went well. But as you can see here in Glover, both of these MIDI mappings or these mapping inputs are continuously sending because they're measuring my movement. So usually, well, now it went well, but now I show you, like, if I accidentally would have still had filter cutoff selected as a parameter, then now it also has mapped this one to 122 because it's the last mapping in Glover, so it will be the last one to be sent. So now accidentally I have mapped both the filter cutoff and the space to the height of my hand, rather than having the roll to control the cutoff and the height to control the space. And this is not what we want. So I can try to delete this mapping, but you'll see that that won't work because this mapping is continuously sending. So the first step is to delete that mapping. And for us to be able to do this, we can mute both our mapping outputs, or we can mute the whole of Glover by clicking the global mute button here. So now I can safely in Ableton click that parameter, and well, my mouse is not happy. Okay, and then delete that mapping. So now this is free for us to remap it again to the correct MIDI mapping. So now for us to avoid mapping the same mapping to both parameters, I need to solo the mapping that I actually want to use. So I'm going to solo the filter cutoff mapping, unmute Glover, and now you see that the filter cutoff is mapped again. I actually didn't do this as carefully as I should have. I probably should have gone out of MIDI mapping mode, select the filter cutoff, and then go into MIDI mapping mode. But we're all good to go now. So let's test what we have so far. This is kind of nice, isn't it? So very muted sound, but with a lot of verb. Cool. All right, let's add some bass. And I am going to use a plugin from Arturia here. So I really like all the Arturia synthesizers, and they just released a Juno one, which is very cool. So I'm going to drag that onto a MIDI track. There we go. And now I'm going to I want to play bass notes, so I'm going to create another chord machine, and first note was a D. It's maybe a bit high for a bass. There we go. And the second one was an A. And I want to do that with the same postures I was using for the chords. So the chords will be supported. When I play the chords, they will be supported by these bass notes. So also a fist, and the second one was a one finger point. So what is happening now is that it is playing those bass notes, but it's also playing the whole chords. And why is that? Well, that has to do with the fact that both of my chord machines are sending on MIDI channel 1, and both of my MIDI tracks in live are receiving MIDI from all inputs on all channels. So we will have to change this. So let's keep the chords on channel 1, and then let's just rename this for clarity's sake, and put the bass on MIDI channel 2. And then in Ableton Live, we have to make sure that it's only listening to Glover. In this case, I don't have any other MIDI controllers attached, but it's always good to be specific. Glover, and then channel 1, and the bass is gonna go on Glover channel 2. So hopefully now all we hear is this bass. Cool. Let's also put both tracks on the monitoring on in, so we hear both of them. I'm gonna change the sound of the bass because it's not very clear compared to the pad. Where is that acidy one? Yeah. Might be a bit low now. Let's up it one octave. Cool. So what if I wanted to MIDI map to a parameter of this bass? As you can see, there's no, like with the macros, no obvious way here to MIDI map to. And if you click this triangle here, it will open all the parameters that this instrument or plugin has available. And sometimes they haven't already been exposed here, but you can configure which ones will be. So I'm going to I want to control the frequency of this sound. So what I can do is I can click configure and then just manually move this fader here, and now you can see that the cutoff is available here, and we can just MIDI map to this in the same way that we did with the macros previously. And wouldn't it be fun if we used the same roll that we use for the cutoff in the pad to also use that with bass? So I'm going to create another MIDI mapping or mapping output with a MIDI message inside, and that's going to be the cutoff. Of the bass. And I'm also going to connect that to roll. Okay, make sure to solo the mapping, and in live click the parameter, so you can see that it's selected by these little corners around it, and go into MIDI mapping mode and then make the roll movement, and you're done. So now we just unsolo this mapping. This is actually a little bit intense, the amount of filter on this bass. So we can do two things. We can adjust our output in Glover, but that would probably mean that I have to make another mapping input with another roll with a different kind of maximum output. I currently don't want to do that, so I'm gonna adjust it in live, and you can do that by in MIDI mapping mode. You can set the maximum of what your mapping will be able to control. I'm just gonna give it something and see what we did. Oh yeah, so don't forget to mute Glover when you make those kind of adjustments. So still a little bit intense, but it works for this purpose. So now we want some drums. And this is a good time to show you how I map those. So let's go to drums and then choose a nice classic 808 kit. Just gonna drag it next to my other instruments and also put the monitoring on in so we can always hear it. And for this we're gonna use MIDI channel 3. So there's two ways to control a drum kit. So you could send individual notes just from a single mapping, or you could also use a chord machine, which I personally think is the easiest way to do this. You can find out which notes these drums are on by hovering over them, and then in the bottom here you can see what note they're on. So I want to play this conga, which apparently is on a D2. So go back to Glover, make another chord machine, and it's going to be conga, and then we'll find the D2. So it's currently playing a synth note because I'm still sending to MIDI channel 1. So let's change that to 3. So let's test this now. So that's clearly conga and not a pad. And we're going to control this with a drum hit. Go with the drum hit down. And then when you add a drum hit down, you see that this other little panel appears, and this is where you can set the threshold. And because only when your movement goes over this threshold, the event will be sent to send that note. No, so this seems to be working okay. I mean, I can slide it down a little bit so it's a bit more sensitive. So now I can play chords and drums at the same time. Let's make this a little bit more exciting, shall we? Let's control the pitch of this conga. And you can find inside this sample, you can find the pitch if you make it a one shot. And then here we have a transpose parameter. So that's what we're going to control. And I'm going to do that with with front to back. I can just drag it into the scene, and you can see now when I'm moving my hand front to back, we can get this signal graph and make a MIDI mapping output. A MIDI mapping, and so this is going to be conga pitch. Solo that mapping. Then we go into live, click the transpose parameter, Command M, and then hover over the leap for it to send the message, and we're mapped. So this is probably again going to be really extreme because it's going to send MIDI between 0 and 127. So it's probably going to pitch it from very, very high to very low. So this time let's adjust the output from Glover. So let's just go with maybe a 70 to a 30. And what do we have now? Yeah, now we have from -3 Oh yeah, now we have from -3 to -17. It's not really what I wanted either. Let's try something else. I kind of want it to go from +12 to -12. Just a bit of fiddling around till you get the right. Yeah, this looks okay. So solo the conga and its pitch for a second, so we don't hear all the other instruments. Isn't that fun? I think this is very fun. And now together we have this beautiful piece of music. Oh, unsolo. So you can, when you have multiple things soloed, you can just use this bigger solo button at the top and it will unsolo everything for you at once. Amazing.